In today's video, I'm going to be combining two of my favorite things, a fall sewing project and a scrappy project. Let's make this super cute scrappy quilted pumpkin pot holder. So go and gather up all your scraps in your favorite color to make your fall projects in, and let's get going. To make your scrappy quilted pumpkin pot holder, you're going to need some scrap fabrics, and I've gone through my scrap pile and picked out some fabrics that I thought would be really cute for this project. They're all nice and warm colors that I thought that would look really nice, and I've given them a quick press because I do like to work with pressed fabric. Then you're going to need a piece of fabric for the back of our pot holder, a piece of regular batting, and a piece of Insulbright batting. And Insulbright is a thermal batting that just gives you extra protection. Now all three of these measure 10.5 inches by 13.5 inches. Then you're going to need some extra wide double fold bias tape, and I do get a lot of questions about how wide it is, and it says on the packaging that it's 1/2 inch wide. So the 1/2 inch wide is how it measures when it's folded, but what it is called, if you're looking it up, is extra wide double fold. Now we'll put a link down below so you can find that product. And you'll also need a copy of my template. I'll put a link in the description below where you can print this out for free. So I've printed out 2 copies of my template, and what I'll do is I'll cut them out and then I'll sellotape them together like that, creating my pumpkin shape. Now you could print these out, remember they're free over on my website, or you could draw your own pumpkin shape, or you could make this project any shape you like. You might just want to do rectangle placemats, so just start off with a rectangle. But for now I'm going to cut mine out and sellotape them together with my paper scissors. So I've popped my template on top of my regular batting, and we're just going to work with the regular batting for now. And I've just got it right in the center there, so I've got about the same amount of space on all 4 sides. I'm just going to draw around my template now, just so we know where to do our scrappy quilting up until. So I'm just using a washable marker. It doesn't matter what you use because we won't see this. I do find it is a little bit hard to get it to draw on the batting, so you might just have to take your time. Okay, it doesn't have to be perfect, but there we go. I can see that, and it's just going to show me where our fabric needs to go past. Like, we don't need to make sure this whole piece has got fabric on it. That would just be a waste. So I've cut my first piece that I'd like to use, and that's a perfect square. We need 4 nice straight edges to get started with. It doesn't have to be a square, it could be a rectangle. And I'm going to place mine slightly off to the left. I think it looks nice, not perfectly in center. Now remembering, depending on how big you make your pieces is how quick this will come together, and less detailed really. If you use smaller pieces it will be more detailed and take you a lot longer. Then I've cut another piece, and it's exactly the same height, but you'll see I've cut it a little bit shorter just because I don't want all my pieces to be exactly the same. I think the charm of doing these scrap projects is that nothing is perfect. So I've made that a little bit smaller intentionally. Now what we're going to do is we're going to fold that right sides together. We're going to make sure these edges are lined up nicely and the top and the bottom edges are lined up nicely, and we're just going to press that down and smooth it out. And then we're just going to sew along the seam with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm not going to worry about pins because this batting kind of almost, the fabric sticks to it. If you want to, you can use pins, but I'm not going to worry about it. So just moving it over carefully and making sure it doesn't move, I'm just going to start right off the very edge there, line up my 1/4 inch foot and sew along that edge. Now I'm going to stitch at stitch length 2. I'm using glide thread in the color Marmalade. I always use white thread, so if you're a regular, don't worry, it's not an imposter. It really is me using a colored thread. I visited Juki Junkies today and they kind of gave me a few different colors to try out. I'm just going to come right off the edge and cut the thread, and then we're going to press that and then add our next fabric. So I'm just going to fold it over and just finger press it so there's no creases in here, and make it nice and flat and press it. Now I know a lot of people don't worry about this step, but I just really love my pressing, so I always press between every step. I'm going to just place a piece of scrap fabric on top because I don't like to iron straight onto my batting. So I'm just going to give that a little press So now we're going to sew on our next piece, and we could sew it onto any of the 4 sides. I'm going to sew mine along there, so I'm going to take my scrappy fabric and audition it. That one's too short, it needs to be at least as long as this whole side here. That one there is perfect, but I think it's a little bit wide, because if I use that piece, that's the only piece I'm going to need. And I think I'd like it to be a little bit more scrappy than that, so I think I'll cut it at about 2.5 inches wide, so then I can sew another piece on to the top there. Now I found it works best if you're starting off with at least 2 straight edges, so I'll cut it at 2.5 inches wide and just cut one side really nice and straight. Okay, let's check that. Okay, I can see it's a little bit too big, and what we can do is we can just fold it down on top and just trim that off with scissors, not making it too close to the edge. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we don't want it overhanging too much. And now what we're going to do is line up this edge and this edge, not worry about this one because we know it's a little bit off, and we're going to sew along here with our 1/4 inch seam allowance just like we did previously. So just starting off the very edge and sewing along with that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Coming right off the edge, and I'm going to press that again and then do exactly the same, auditioning another piece and sewing it on. So now I'm just going to work out where I want to sew my next piece, and I think I want to sew it along here. So again, I'll just audition them and see what I think looks nice. I quite like that one, but it's a bit wonky, so I'm just going to have to cut that, and it's really long, but we'll just get 2 nice sides and then we'll trim it down again. Just checking that this edge is in fact nice and straight, and it is, so I'm just going to cut off that piece. And I'm just going to cut off this side so I know it's definitely nice and straight. And I'm going to place it next to it. Now I know that this edge is nice and straight, so that's a good edge to line that up on. So that's looking good. I'm going to place it right sides together. Now remember, this was a little bit off, so we're going to ignore that. We're just going to worry about this little bit here, which was nice and straight. This edge is nice and straight, and then I'm just going to trim off this bit of excess here again. I'm not going to try and trim it exactly on that edge there, because if I try to cut it exactly, it's never exactly, and then it will end up all wonky. So I'd rather cut it a little bit bigger than too short. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is sew along that edge again with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then I'll just give that another quick press. So now I want to sew a piece along here, but I don't want one big really long piece. So what I'm going to do is sew 2 pieces together, and I've already found the pieces that I want to sew together. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take them, sew them together like that, not on my batting, press them, and then I'll measure it and cut it to the right size. So I'll just sew them together and then I'll show you what I'm going to do. So I've sewn it together and I want to place it there. I want these seams right in the middle here. So what I'm going to do is just trim along this one side here. Then we can do this side just with the scissors by eye. And I'm not going to worry about trimming off the bottom because I want it to be chunky on the bottom, and it's just coming past my blue line here, which means it's going to be perfect. So just checking. Okay, I need to trim it at about there. Doesn't have to be perfect. Remember, it is meant to be scrappy. Okay, that looks really cute. And then what I'm going to do is just cut off this excess. So now what I'm going to do is just face that right sides together again. Line up the edges. Now you'll see all the edges are going a bit wonky here, but I know this is a nice straight line. So I'm going to focus on that and then just do my best to make sure it's about as straight as I can get it. I've also got this seam here that I can sort of line up that edge with. So that looks pretty good. I'll trim the excess off, not too close to that edge. Okay, and then I'm just going to sew this on like I have been. Just going to press that again. Now I'm just going to continue that process until I've come out past the blue lines that we drew for our pumpkin. So now I've finished sewing on all my pieces, and if I lift this one up you can see I'm definitely come past the line that we originally drew. So you just want to make sure you pass all your lines. Now the way I did it was very particular. If you want yours wonky, that might be the look you're going for, and by all means just don't be as particular as I was with it, and that also looks really cute and great. So then I'm going to take my pumpkin template again and place that on top. And I'm going to work out where I'm going to draw my line once again. And now we've come past the shape, but I just want to make sure all these edges are past where I'll draw my line. For example, I don't want to accidentally place it down here, draw my line, and then I've got this big corner popping out of my pumpkin. So I'm just making sure I'm within all those funny seams, and that looks perfect to me. I might move it up a bit because remember this bottom piece was quite chunky and this top piece is quite skinny. So we'll just, there we go. I think that looks great. And now all I'm going to do is just draw around that edge again, just so we've got our shape. And we're not going to see this line. I'm just using a washable marker, but we won't see it, so don't worry. Okay, so now what we're going to do is take our other piece of batting and our backing fabric. So I've got my piece of fabric for the backing with the right side facing down and the wrong side facing me. I'm going to take my Insel Bright and pop that on top, lining up all the edges. Now there's no right or wrong side. This side is metallic, but it doesn't matter which way that's facing. And then I'm going to take my pumpkin and pop that on top. Now just be careful that we are lining it up so we're catching all three layers. And that looks pretty good to me. It's a little bit deceiving because this is a little bit longer. So I'm just making sure it is sitting within all three layers. And then when I'm happy and it's all smoothed out, I'm just going to pop some pins in to hold it in place. And then what we're going to do is sew around this edge just within the edge of the pumpkin that we drew. And just use as many pins as you'd like to hold it securely. If you're a quilter, you might want to use your basting pins for this step. We just don't want it moving around when we're sewing our three layers together. Okay, let's sew. So where my line that I drew is, I'm just going to stitch about 1/8 of an inch in from it, all around the whole pumpkin. And actually I'm going to make my stitch length a bit bigger. We can make it 3.5. This is just a basting stitch. You can remove the pins as you need to. And you can stop and smooth out the fabric as you need to. It doesn't have to be perfect, but try not to go too far in because we need the binding to be able to cover these stitches. Just coming right past where I started and cutting my thread. Okay, let's move on to the next step. So now we're just going to draw the lines of the quilting that we're going to do. Now you can do your quilting however you'd like. You could do them straight across and down. I like to do them echoing the shape of the pumpkin. So what I'm going to do is take a chalk pencil. I'm going to mark the center top of the pumpkin about 1/4 inch down because our binding will come down to that point. So that's about in the center and about 1/4 inch down. And then I'm going to do the same at the bottom. Find about the center. You could measure if you want to. I'm just going to do it by eye, and then just mark about 1/4 inch up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from that top mark, echo the shape of the pumpkin down to the second dot we drew, and I'm going to come in about 1 inch or so. And it doesn't have to be perfect, because you know what? Pumpkins aren't perfect, and that's just nature. Nature's not perfect, so just go for it. And in fact, if you don't want to draw it, you could just sew it if you're confident at your sewing skills and drawing these curved lines. So I've done one, and then I'll do 2 more. Coming back down to that bottom mark, so starting at the top mark, echoing around, and then coming down. I got a bit close there, but I can fix that up if I want to. I'll rub it out a bit. And come down, and then I'll do 1 more. Okay, and now I'm just going to sew those with my sewing machine. So we're just going to start about 1/4 of an inch away from that first top marking that we made, and we're going to follow that outside line that we drew. So I'll just put my foot down. I'm going to stitch at stitch length 3.5. It's a nice long decorative stitch, because essentially we're just quilting our pumpkin now. And remember, this doesn't have to be perfect at all. And then I want to come down to that bottom mark that I did. And then I'm going to stop and just lift up my foot and make sure my needle's down and turn a little bit, so I can come around and do this second half of that line there. And then we're going to come right up to that top mark that we did. And I'm going to stop right there, lift my foot up, make sure my needle's down, and just turn, so then I can follow my second line and go around all the way around, and then I'll follow the third line that I did and go all the way around. Now when I get back to the point that I started, I'm just going to turn, lift up my foot, keep my needle down, and just follow that straight line a little bit, and then do a back stitch. Cut my thread. Now I'm just going to give that a quick press so that it's sitting a little bit nicer. So now what we're going to do is take our fabric scissors and really carefully cut along the line that we drew, making sure we don't cut those stitches that we did. Well, they're basting stitches just to keep our 3 layers together, but it's just going to help us do our binding a little bit easier if we haven't cut those stitches. So just take your time. Again, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. So I'm just going to follow that blue line that I did, making sure I don't cut those stitches. Okay, there we go, and oh, I've just missed a little bit there. You can see our pumpkin is taking shape. You might want to give it a quick press at this stage. And now let's sew our binding on. So I've pressed my bias tape. Now you could always just make your own binding for this step too. We don't have to use the bias tape. I'm just a bit lazy and find it a nice quick way to finish it off. Now it generally has a right and a wrong side, a front and a back. So that's actually the back and that's the front, because the front is just ever so slightly shorter, and that's so that when we sew along this edge we're definitely catching the back. So I'm just going to flip it over, and I usually just attach it and sew it as I go, but I know some people find that a bit tricky, so we can clip it in place if you'd like. So what I'm going to do is, remember we did our center mark? Well, I want to start a bit before that, about an inch before that. I'm going to open it up and there's a crease there. I want to push this edge right into that crease so it's really sitting inside there, and then we'll clip. Or you could just sew it as you go. And then I'll open it up and come along and clip it, maybe an inch along, until I've gone all the way around. Just like so. And where it's kind of bubbling up there, don't worry, as we sew around it will sit down. But I'm just going to sew mine on as I go, and I'll show you how I do that as well. So my binding is sandwiched in there. We're starting about 1 inch away from that center mark. Now I'm using my left compensating foot. This is a special foot that you can get with the Juki sewing machines, and it's probably my favorite foot. What it is it's spring loaded, and I butt this ledge up against the edge of my bias tape, and I just get a really nice 1/8 of an inch seam allowance along my whole tape. Now if you don't have this foot or a Juki, then just use whatever foot you need to use to get a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And I'm stitching at stitch length 3.5, a nice long decorative stitch. And then all I'm doing is, as I'm coming up to it, I'm just making sure it's in place just before I get to it. So I'm working about 2 inches ahead of myself here. And then I'll just stop and keep adjusting as I go. Or like I said earlier, you could pin it, clip it all in place before you start. It is a little bit harder on the curves, so just slow down. That's my best advice to you. Just take your time. It's not a rush. Just enjoy the fact that we're nearly done, and this last little bit is just the final touch that's going to make it look absolutely beautiful. So I'm coming right up to where I started, so I just want to go right past that. And I want to stitch down to where we did that center mark, or just about 1/8 of an inch before it. Then what we're going to do is we're going to pull this away and sew right off our pumpkin. And then we're going to sew down the edge of this bias tape just to close it up. Now it only needed to be 6 inches, so I think I'm going to have to quickly measure that and trim it because that's a little bit long. So now I'm just going to bring this up and around so it creates a loop. So it's a loop to hang it, and also what's meant to represent the little pumpkin stalk right there. So just place it how you're happy with it, and I think that looks kind of cute. So what I'm going to do is just flip it over to the back. I can see it's really extra long there. What I want to do is just fold it here and sew it. So I'm just going to cut off that excess there. Then I'm going to fold it under. We're just going to stitch right here, so we're catching it right by the binding there, so it's not going to be too obvious. So I'm just going to hold it in place there, pop it underneath, and start at the very beginning. I'm actually going to make my stitch length 2 so it's nice and compact. And then I'll do a back stitch. And then I'll go back over the top and cut my thread. Okay, and then I'm going to cut off any of my loose threads there, and we're all done. So there we have the super cute quilted scrappy pumpkin pot holder. Boy, that's a tongue twister, but I got it right finally. Now, people often say you didn't show me the back. So there's the back, and if you wanted to, you could also do this scrappy and then it would be double-sided. That's entirely up to you. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please do hit the like button. It really helps me out and lets the algorithm know that you liked my video. And if you'd like to make a different kind of pot holder, you could check out my lattice pie pot holder. I'll put the link above. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next video.